And I wanted to introduce Carrie Cheadle. So some of you may have heard or seen her presentation. She did one on Training Peaks, I don't know, maybe last year sometime.
A couple. Yeah, I won last year and one the year before, I think. Yeah.
But the psychology of suffering is fascinating. Because as every athlete knows, and myself in particular, when I think back to the first triathlon I did, and it took me literally 30 minutes to get to the first buoy, there's a lot that goes on in your head, or doesn't. And the book Carrie wrote is called On Top of Your Game, Mental Skills to Maximize Your Athletic Performance. So, for me, not just to actually get through the athletic endeavor, but to actually maximize it. So, really excited. Carrie has come here to joined us here. And I was reading an article this morning, U.S. News, that exercise is good for your brain.
It's true.
But probably only when your brain is working well. So, introduce Carrie. She's got her master's, bachelor's in psychology, Bachelor of Arts in psychology from Sonoma State University, Master of Arts in sports psychology, and teaching both undergraduate and graduate levels for psychology classes.
Yes, sports psychology.
Sports psychology. So, thank you, Carrie, and let's welcome Carrie.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So, again, my name is Carrie Cheadle, and I'm an expert in sports psychology, and I'm a mental skills coach. And I have the unbelievable privilege of working with athletes, from recreational athletes to competitive elite and professional athletes competing at international and national levels. And I happen to specialize in endurance athletes. So I'm so excited to be here. And I'm really excited because I inevitably specializing with endurance athletes, I've worked with athletes that are also coaches. And so for like the past 10 years, I've been thinking, man, somebody needs to come along and figure out how to support these coaches in building their businesses, because it's something that I do with young sports psychology professionals and helping them build their business. So when Training Peaks told me what they were doing and emailed me and said, hey, do you want to be on board? I said, absolutely, I'm there. So I'm really excited to be here and to be a part of figuring out how can we help support you to be more effective with your clients. And so I feel like the role that I have here is working on that mental piece. And so because inevitably, let's see, you're all coaching, by show of hands, how many of you have helped your athlete in some way work on their mental game? All right? Yeah, exactly. So what I get to do is kind of help give you some tools with this piece in particular, with the psychology of suffering and how to handle the pain. So how can you help your athletes really dig into that pain cave so that they aren't the obstacle getting in the way of the work that you're doing with them on their physical game. So I'm going to give you 5 fantastic tools of what to do with your athletes in terms of working on the mental piece. And so just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about is just a kind of a quick introduction to pain, why people end up holding back and not pushing themselves once they get to that point where they start to feel that suffering and feel that pain. 5 mental training tools to help with that piece of the psychology of suffering. And then when you might want to seek out more support for your athlete, and then we'll do a little Q&A too for your specific questions that you guys have. So pain is incredibly complex, and it's because it's a subjective experience. And some of the recent research that's coming out talks about how they're starting to recognize that it's not just a physiological experience, but it's an emotional experience as well, and that the emotional piece and the pain piece have some of the same neural mechanisms. So we're really starting to understand more this psychological piece that is a big part of our perception of pain and how that plays into the pain threshold. So it's incredibly complex because it's subjective and because there's several different factors that mitigate that perception of pain, from the mood that you're in to personality traits, also to hydration and your level of fitness and your training. So all of these different things come into play when it comes to that threshold, that pain threshold. So pain, some of us have known what that kind of pain feels like. So there are different kinds of pain. There's the pain that's there's pain that's, pain is always a signal that your brain is trying to give to your body to pay attention to something. And so what's interesting with pain and with endurance athletes is that we have to delineate the difference between pain that's dangerous and something that we need to pay attention to that might be signaling an injury or that kind of pain, or pain that just comes when you're pushing your body to the limit. And because the way that the brain takes in that information of pain, our immediate response, unless you're already a lot of this has to do with the difference between that subjective experience of pain. If you have a lot of experience as an endurance athlete and you understand the difference between suffering and pain, you're able to kind of push yourself through that, and you're able to talk yourself through like, oh, this is suffering, I know I can keep going. But our brain, that signal that it sends that kind of automatic signal to try and shut things down, because your brain's job is to protect the body. So some of you might have heard of the idea of the central governor, which is this theory that it's still a little bit, there's controversial research on it, but there's a theory that there's a mechanism in your brain that if your brain perceives that you're not capable, that you're going to in some way do harm to yourself. So a good example might be you're on a climb, and you think that you get to the top of your climb and you're suffering, but you see the top of the climb and you're like, oh my gosh, thank God. Okay, there's the top of the climb. And then you get to the top and you see that you have further to go. That wasn't actually the top of the climb. Your brain, the central governor in your brain thought, oh, I can get to that part of the climb. I don't know if I can get to the next part. And so the idea is that it starts to shut things down physiologically in your body because it's trying to protect yourself from harm. So there's all these different sort of potential things that have an impact on our ability to understand the difference between, for your brain to understand the difference between pain and suffering and what you're actually able to push yourself through. So some of the reasons your athletes or yourself don't always push through that pain and actually push to your actual physical potential, one of the big reasons is fatigue. So it's not always mental. Sometimes there are physical things that are happening that are just going to prevent you from being able to really actually push to your actual suffering threshold. So one of them is once you get to that point when you're tired, not only are you physically tired, your body's physically tired, but it affects your brain's ability to make decisions. So your brain, you have a hard time even creating the thought of wanting to push yourself more or needing to push yourself more when you're tired. And that fatigue might be because of something physical. It might be because you're not hydrated, you're not fueled, you're not trained enough for what you're doing and you're pushing yourself to do. So you might have the fatigue because of that, but it also affects your brain. So I had a good example of this is I had an elite, he was a college runner, and his distance was 5K, so not quite, a little bit of an endurance athlete, but he just was working and was fatigued and couldn't make that thought happen in his brain to push himself. But when he heard it externally from his coach, he heard his coach yelling, go catch that guy. As soon as he heard it, he was able to connect that thought and then go do it. But he wasn't able to do that himself. So sometimes the fatigue is the thing that keeps us from being, not just because of physically, but because your brain is just not able to make that decision. Another really interesting reason why we don't always push to that threshold is because of the expectation. So there's a really interesting research on our expectations of pain and what the pain is going to feel like, and how that then changes our behavior and changes not only our perception of the pain, but our actual feeling of the pain. So if you are going into your event, or your athletes are going into your event or into their events, and they have this perception in their mind that this is going to hurt and I'm not sure I'm capable of this, when they actually get out there and race, they're literally going to feel that the intensity of the pain more than someone that doesn't have that same expectation. What's really interesting in the research too is that the people that have that high pain anxiety are also the ones that are the most susceptible to placebos to work against that. So if you have an athlete that has a high pain anxiety, you can give them some of these tools and they tend to respond really well to them. So the expectation that we have of how hard something's going to be or how easy something's going to be has a big influence in that pain threshold. So it's like I remember when I was working with a bunch of cyclists out in California, and one of the first races of the year out there is Redlands, and everybody would work this Redlands race up in their mind to be this like, oh my God, it's the most painful race of the year and it's awful and you're going to hate it. And it was this kind of, tale that kept getting told over and over and over again. So people would really work it up in their minds. And that was something I had to work on with my athletes is it's just another race. And as soon as they recognize that, suddenly the pain threshold changed because their minds changed about the race. And then the other thing that I see a lot with my athletes is fear. The reason that they get to the end of their race and go, man, I had more to give, is because they were afraid of burning all of their matches. So there's some athletes that never really they never really experience what their limit is because they're always holding something back because of that fear of burning all their matches. Well, I could finish and do pretty well, but I don't know that I want to risk blowing up and not finishing the race at all. So that fear of failure is the thing that keeps them from ever really recognizing what their actual limit is. That's one I work on, and you probably work on with your athletes a lot. So the idea of pain, the thing to kind of recognize is that there really is a big, it's a combination. There's a combination between the body and the mind that create our perception of pain and that pain threshold, and that it's going to be different for everyone. It's going to be different for all of your athletes. You've probably had that experience with some of your athletes where some of them, that they are physically capable of pushing more and they're just holding themselves back. And you've probably had the opposite too, of people that aren't quite well trained, but they can just push through any kind of pain possible. So there's really a continuum. But once you get through, like, am I fighting off an illness? Am I well hydrated? Am I trained? Am I fueled? If all of those things are in place and you're still holding yourself back, chances are it's the mind that's the piece that's holding you back. So I'm going to go through 5 different mental training tools that you can use with your athletes that I've used with all of my athletes and that are also proven through research to help with this idea of how can you really push yourself past that point when you think you can't push yourself anymore. So the first one is to really just accept the pain. So I have some athletes that just fight against it, and they so badly, they're so afraid of it, of the actual, they have that high, these are the athletes that have maybe the high pain anxiety. So they just aren't sure if they are going to be capable of handling that situation. And they don't want it. So they fight against it. So one of the things we talk about is just accepting that is part of your race day. And that's okay. And sometimes with people who really struggle with this, you could do this with your athletes. One of the things I'll do is have them actually write out a list and really get into the details of, like, tell me everything you love about your sport. What are the things that bring you out and get you out training on those days when you do not want to get out and train? What is it that you love about it? And get them to write all these things out, and then talk about what are the things that you hate about it. And then they write those things out, and then they kind of look at these two sides and go, okay, can you accept that these things on this side that you don't enjoy are part of the package of getting this other side of what you do enjoy. And it's sort of this, for some people, it can be a really eye-opening sort of experience of like, okay, fine, I'm done fighting against that. I'm no longer going to spend my energy worrying about how hot it is or how cold it is or, the climbs that are coming up, and just be there in the moment. So accepting the pain is a big piece with being able to push yourself through and almost get to the point where you can enjoy that's part of what you're doing. Some athletes already have this. They already have the enjoying the suffering piece, but not. And I'm sure you've seen this. Not all of your athletes will. So another one. There was some really interesting research. Some of you might have read it. It came out. I can't remember what year it came out, but it was with Olympic cyclists, and they were. They had done a qualitative research study on finding out from them what are the things that they do to get themselves, when you're at your limit and pushing to your max capability physically, what are the things that they did to help get them through that? And one of the things that they said was that they had a really specific race goal. So it's one thing to say, I just want to finish the race, which is a worthy goal. But when you have something that's more specific, you're more likely to push yourself at that point when you want to stop, when you have that real specific race goal in front of you, versus when you don't have quite as specific of a race goal, you might allow yourself to slow down, or you allow yourself to walk when really you are capable of continuing. So having a specific race goal in mind, and not only having an outcome goal, which is sort of what is it that you want in the outcome of the event, but also what are the process goals that are going to get you there. So that's one of the things I work on with all of my athletes is, if this is the outcome that you want, what do you need to be doing in this moment in order to achieve that? So it helps them keep their focus in the moment instead of kind of time traveling into the future and worrying about, am I going to finish? It's, what do I need to do right now in order to accomplish that? So having those process goals to help keep their focus right there in that moment instead of worrying about, how am I going to finish this race? But also having that outcome goal that is important to them, that they have identified as their goal, that they have ownership over, is going to help them push through those moments when they want to stop. So another big one is just relax, relax, relax. So the more physical tension you have, so any kind of psychological tension, or when you elicit your stress response. So if you're getting ready for your race and you're starting to feel some performance anxiety, it elicits your stress response. That has a corresponding physiological response of creating physical muscular tension. When you have an increase in muscular tension, it's going to increase your feeling of pain. So anything you can do to help your athletes relax while they're out there is going to help them with this pain threshold and this idea of psychology of suffering. So there's actually a couple resources on my website. So with my book, at the end of each chapter, there's tools at the end of each chapter, and there's worksheets, and then one of the chapters is relaxing the body. And there's a couple audio files on there, so you can just have your athletes go to the site and say, okay, your training tool this week, we're going to work on mental training, and you're going to work on breathing, and just have them go listen to the breathing audio or the progressive relaxation audio. So this idea of relaxation and being able to build this skill in your athletes so that they can actually transfer it while they're running or while they're on the bike. It's a skill that needs to be built up. It's almost like if you think about your central nervous system and that, you have your stress response and your relaxation response. The more you do these relaxation skills, like doing the breathing and doing the progressive relaxation, you're teaching your brain and your body how to elicit that relaxation response so that you can actually bring it out onto the bike. It's one thing to do it in bed, when you're relaxed and before you're going to sleep. It's another thing to do it when you're standing around 1,000 people getting ready for your swim start. So it's a skill that you have to practice. But one thing that I'll have my endurance athletes do that you could, it's super easy. It works immediately. And you can even try it here actually let's try it. Let's try it. We're going to try it right now. My mic's not working. All right. We're going to try it right now. So just kind of shake your arms out for a second. And you're going to take in a big, nice, deep breath. And as you exhale, you're going to say, relax my hands, relax my face, and breathe. And do that again on your own. Relax my hands, relax my face, breathe. Ooh, yeah, you can say it out loud. So somebody tell me, what was the next thing you noticed that happened for you after you did that? Good, yeah. So you kind of you feel it. Did anyone feel their hands actually relax and their face relax? Right? So what else did people notice? What was the next thing that happened?
Other areas relaxed.
Right? Yeah. So I don't know, is that what you experienced too? Yes. So the breathing slowing down, that's the thing that relaxes the physical piece. So when it's not, a lot of times people will say, take a deep breath, right? That's not relaxing. So it's the longer exhale that actually slows everything down. So when you're, if you're teaching this to your athletes, you get them to just exhale a beat longer than their inhale, and that's what actually slows things down and slows your heart rate down and relaxes everything. So a lot of people experience that as soon as they relax their hands, relax their face, shoulders drop and other things relax. And you can feel it on the bike, you can feel it when you're running. So it's a real, it's a nice trigger for okay, everything's cool, I'm cool, it's all right, I'm okay, I got this. So anything you can do to help your athletes out there relax. So this next one, we're going to spend a little bit more we're going to spend a little bit more time on this one because this is the most important one really here, is this idea of where are you focusing? Because where you're focusing and the thoughts that you're feeding yourself, that really is one of the biggest pieces that either feeds into that perception of pain and whether you feel like you can handle the pain or that you cannot handle the pain. So the first one on there is there's a lot of interesting research on whether or not you should distract yourself from the pain or dig into the pain. And so the focus here, there's association or dissociation. So dissociation would be a way that you're distracting yourself from the pain. And so what the research shows is that's really effective and works really well when you're working at lower thresholds and maybe for longer distances. So an example of this is using music. Music is an amazing tool for shifting an athlete's rate of perceived exertion. So a lot of my athletes will use music in that way. So music is a great disassociation tool. Some people will listen to audiobooks. Some people will do their mental lists in their head. I had one athlete, I was speaking at before the San Francisco Marathon, and he came up to me and told me that his technique was he would make up stories about the runners that were running around him. So he would look at the other runners and be like, oh, I wonder what that guy ate for breakfast, and I wonder what he does for a living. And he would just make these stories up in his head, and he was like, and all of a sudden 5 miles went by, and I was like, that's brilliant. I'm stealing that. I should have got his name. So that it can be a really powerful technique for getting through lower threshold. But when you're at the peak sort of suffering where you're just in it and it's all you can do to keep going, that's no longer a technique that's going to work. So that's when the more effective technique that works in that situation is more association. And association is you're focusing on technique, you're focusing on your body, you're focusing on your breathing. So when you're really, really pushing, your brain, it's not capable of being distracted at that point. All you can do is be in it and tune into it. So that's when I'm having my athletes focus on the skill of breathing that we've worked on, like diaphragmatic breathing, you might have them, as their coach, you might have them focusing on a particular feeling of the technique and just focusing on that when they're in that real sort of height of suffering. Another one that's really effective in that situation is rhythmic cognitive behavior. So what that means basically is having a repetitive mantra, something that they just say over and over. Because it's, when you're working with your athletes on self-talk, some athletes they have paragraphs in their mind of what they're saying to themselves and kind of talking themselves up. And that when you're at your peak intensity, that's not always effective. So having just one word that you continue to repeat to yourself, and some of you might already have this, you might have already been doing it naturally. Another thing is counting your pedal strokes or counting your running steps or counting your swim strokes. So for me, when I'm running, I count to 8. Over and over and just count my steps. Some people like to count longer, and some people, it's not as effective for them to count longer, and they need to just keep it at a certain number over and over. And that's a really powerful technique for getting through that as well. Another one that came out of that research with the cyclists was establishing an end. So being able to, and this kind of taps into that idea of the central governor, being able to tell your brain that this is not going to happen forever. This won't be, there is going to be an end to it. Helps you be able to continue to push while you need to push. Because if the perception in your mind, and it's not even necessarily something that's conscious, but if the perception in your mind is, I can't keep doing this, I don't know how long I can push, you're just going to end up slowing yourself down because of that. I don't know if I can handle this situation. So establishing a specific end in mind. And so the way that I've worked on this, and you guys have probably done this with your athletes, is I'll have athletes pick a certain marker. You're just running to that next tree. You get to that tree, you take your circle breath, you take your diaphragmatic breath, and then take 5 more steps and pick your next marker. So that's establishing the end. So your brain goes, oh, I can run to that tree. Because when you get to that moment where you're like, oh my God, I want to stop, you're thinking, how the hell am I going to get to the end of my race? And so your brain can't comprehend that and thinks it can't handle that. But when it establishes that end to something shorter, like I don't have to get to the end of my race, I have to get to that next tree, and then I make my next decision. It also gives your brain something to think about. Because our brain, we can only process one piece of information at a time, and then we might be able to take in another piece of information. So when you give your brain something else to focus on, it helps in that way distract it from the pain that you're feeling. I'm focusing on this, I don't need to focus on this. There's no brain power or processing that's going to give that room when you're giving yourself something to focus on. And in that way, I'm going to talk about critical moments. So this is one I do with all of my endurance athletes. So it's kind of like creating a focus plan for your race, basically. So you have your race plan and you know exactly what you want to do during your race. This is thinking about what are some of the critical moments of your sport. What are the when you think about and this is, can be true in any sport, but when you think about, cycling or running or triathlon, what are some of those moments that become really imperative for you to dial in your focus in order to feel confident and get through that moment? So let's pick triathlon, for example. Somebody yell out, what's a critical moment in triathlon?
T1.
Right? So T1. Good. What's another one?
Being on the bike.
Being on the bike. Yes. Good. What's another one?
85 miles.
Good, yes, right? And so what's interesting is some of the, with my athletes, some of those critical moments, they're always the same for every athlete. And then some, they'll be really specific and unique to that athlete. So you can talk this through with your athletes and go, okay, when it comes to you and your race, what are some of the critical moments that come in mind where you think you might start feeding the monster? So when I talk about self-talk, I talk about we've got a little athlete on one shoulder and a little monster on the other, and whichever one you feed is the one that's going to get stronger. So what are those moments when you tend to feed the monster? So for some of them, it might be when I get passed on the run or when I get passed on the bike, or so some of them might be really specific to that athlete. So you come up with your list of here's the situation, here are the critical moments, and then you think about, okay, in that moment, where does my focus need to be in order to feel confident and get through that moment successfully? So for some, it might be when I start to get tired, when I have that thought of when I want to stop. Another way you can do this with your athletes too that works really well is I'll have them create like a little stoplight. So when you're in your green light, you're feeling amazing, you're on fire, there's nothing you can't do, everything you want to do is just, the way you planned it out is just, it's all working perfectly. And then you have your red light, which is like, everything went to shit, I don't know what happened. So, and a lot of times athletes feel like, I don't know, I went to green and then I was in red and I don't know. But there's this whole yellow light of things that happen where if you help your athletes really tune into what's in that yellow light, what's that first thought that gets you moving from green to yellow, and catch it there, it's much easier to get back into your green light from yellow than it is from your red light. You can from your red, but it's a lot harder. So it's that same idea of like, okay, so here's my critical moment, and identifying what those moments are, and then where does my focus need to be in that moment in order to get through that moment successfully. So you're basically helping them plan their behavior ahead of time. So they've already mapped it out in their mind, how they want to respond in that situation. And you're much, much more likely to respond that way in that situation when you've already done this exercise of actually writing it out too, because there's a way that the brain connects to the way that we write and the way we process information, that it connects with our memory more deeply than just talking about it or typing it. So I have them literally write this out. And then you think about, okay, this is where my focus needs to be. How am I going to get it there? So what is the thing I need to do in order to make sure my focus remains right there in that moment? And I've had athletes just come out with amazing races because they have planned this out. And what's interesting is, you can't plan for every situation, but when they've done this and then some crazy random situation gets thrown their way on race day, they end up being more resilient because they're like, oh, they can apply something else that they've done to that situation. Man, I had an athlete that she was an Ironman, and she was going to do her second Ironman, and she was worried because that first Ironman's kind of magical, and she was worried about. She just was putting so much pressure on herself, and she wanted to have a great race, and she was afraid it wasn't going to be as great. And she had a lot of fears about the weather and just all these challenges. And we did her critical moments, and we got her prepared, and we had worked up to the race, and she just you can't even imagine stuff that she got thrown on race day, like one thing after another. And she ended up handling all of it just beautifully, things you would never think of in a million years. And she just had an amazing race. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and she just kept going. And it really was, that idea of planning, like, I can handle this. So it's not just, it helps your athletes in those situations where suffering might be the critical moment, and it is for a lot of athletes. It's Carrie, how do I get myself to keep going when I know I want to stop? And for some of my athletes too, we'll just make it okay. We'll create, I'll have them talk to their coaches, and they'll create that as part of their training plan, so they don't have to occupy their brain with that mental energy anymore of like, well, what if I walk? And does that mean I'm not a real athlete? That it just becomes, then you're going to walk every, for a minute after every 2 miles, or whatever it is that they come up with their coach that works. So they're no longer occupying their brain with that. They can just relax and run their race. And some of them have had faster times doing that because they're not creating all of this stress, thinking about, I don't want to stop, and then they just end up doing that exact thing. So the last mental training tool with this is helping your athletes shift their perception of pain. So this is where, it's interesting how to delineate that difference between pain that's dangerous, that our brain kind of recognizes this is something that I need to stop because it's something I need to pay attention to, or this is I'm hurting, but I am physically capable of continuing this. One of the really interesting things, I haven't come across any research on this. I should make one of my students do this. What's been really interesting for me working with endurance athletes and working with age groupers and working with people who are now athletes that maybe didn't have any kind of athletic background and hadn't competed before and haven't had a lot of experience with this idea of really pushing their body to its potential. We've had to work through this a little bit more of teasing out the difference between what pain is dangerous and what pain's not okay, and what you're actually physically capable of doing. And it's been an interesting thing that I've seen more with my athletes that didn't grow up as athletes or didn't have that athletic background. So one of the things I'll have them do is to kind of help send that message to their brain that they're capable of more than they think, is to just, you can create this in their training plans when there's, when you're having them maybe when you're having them do intervals or you're having them do something that's high intensity, to have them push just past that point of when they're supposed to stop, and go for another eighth of a mile, go for another run another 20 steps, whatever it is, but just that their brain is going past that point that they've been told to stop helps send that message like, oh, I can do more than I think I can. It starts to just send that message to your brain and push the envelope for them a little bit. And I think the other thing too with that can help with that piece and with your athletes that might have hold back because of that fear of what if I burn all my matches and I don't end up finishing the race, or I blow up and end up not accomplishing my goal, to have some B races or C races where that is the goal. The goal is to find your limit and not to, hurt themselves, but like to really, your goal this time is to go push yourself as hard as you can and see where that limit is, so that they can start to play with that idea and not be afraid of it, not be afraid of taking the risk and not internalize it so deeply of what it means if they're not going to finish where they thought they would. So to just have them go do it, you practice that. And so the other thing that I didn't really talk about on here, but the other thing that's really powerful too is some athletes need to feel it in training to know that they can do it in competition. So, I've worked with some athletes that, their coaches might not have them doing the same mileage as their rate, so it's a really interesting balance between this mental and physical piece and what you need optimally physically, and what you need optimally mentally. Sometimes there's a bridge that has to be built there. So for some athletes, they just have to know that they're capable of it before they get into competition. Other athletes, that's not true. So we'll do a lot of simulation training of, trying to get as close as possible to what it might be like in competition, so you can feel what it's actually like. So, I do that with people who have fear. I've worked with a lot of athletes on fear of the open water swim. So I have them go out with a group of people they trust, and have people swim on top of them and next to them, and have them take their goggles off and practice putting it back on. So all these fears that they have this opportunity to practice it. So the first time they have it, it's not in competition. They already know it's that planned behavior again. So I love this quote. This is kind of, one of the most powerful things with this idea of suffering with your athletes. And the quote is, "The road is made by people walking on it. Things are so because they are called so. What makes them so? Making them so makes them so. What makes them not so? Making them not so makes them not so." So if you go into your race, your athletes go into their race and they think, "I don't know if I can do this." Well, you've made your road. You don't know if you can do this. If you go into your race and go, "I've done everything I can. I trust my training. I'm ready for this. I've done my mental prep. I'm good to go," then that's the road that you've made. So that expectation of suffering lays the road for the experience of your athlete. One of the things I'll tell my endurance athletes too that sometimes help is to just accept whatever the day brings. That whatever that day brings to you, that's what your race is meant to be that day. And to just go with it and accept that. And if you're blessed and privileged to call yourself an athlete for long enough, at some point you're going to have a race that does not go well. And it was just your day. And that doesn't mean anything for your next race. So to just, kind of let them know, like, whatever happens today, that's what's supposed to happen today. This is your day. So, that with this idea of psychology of suffering, it's just, and those 5 different things, it's nice to have a lot of different tools in your tool belt, because when it comes to suffering, what's interesting is that sometimes the thing that always works for you is you pull it out of your tool belt and all of a sudden it's not working. So having a few different tools that you can go to when you're at that threshold and you're like, "I don't know if I can keep going." To be able to have a few different things to choose from. And to know too that, if you've really worked with your athlete on this mental piece and you just can see that they have all of the physical capability in the world and they're just getting in their own way. And it's the mental piece that's getting in their own way, that you have this amazing field of sports psychology professionals that are a fantastic resource and tool for you guys to be able to help your athlete. So I'll have coaches, I work with coaches, and sometimes I'll work with coaches and they'll just ask me for ideas for their athletes. But other times they'll just refer their athletes to me, like, "I've done everything we can't get past this thing. Do you think this is something you can help with?" So there is, with this idea of how to help you be more effective with your clients, sometimes that's the thing. It's like, if this is the thing that's getting in the way, it doesn't matter what you're doing with them physically, this is the thing that's going to get them away. And it's, and I've seen coaches get really frustrated with themselves, thinking that they're not feeling confident in themselves and in their ability as a coach, when really it has nothing to do with your coaching ability. It has everything to do with that athlete and their own little, not so little, demons that they have that they need to work through in order to get past these hurdles and get out of their own way. So just to wrap up, and we're going to do a little Q&A, the biggest thing I let them all know too is it's not always mental. It's when it comes to suffering, it's not always mental. Sometimes I have to tell them, why you suffered? You didn't do the work. You didn't you weren't well hydrated. You weren't fueled. You didn't do the training that you wanted to do, and that's why you suffered. And if you're pissed off about it now, let's talk about what we need to do moving forward into the next race. So sometimes it is just that reality check of like, you know what? It wasn't mental this time. It was physical. And what do you want to do about that? And then just, working on the mental piece is helping them set themselves up for success. So it's such a huge piece of performance, but it's not always something that athletes deliberately work on. And it's something that you can help them deliberately work on by putting that as a part of their training plan. If here's our physical goals for the week, here's the training plan for the week, here's your mental goals for the week, and this is what we're going to work on. You can, have them do the worksheet. All the worksheets from my book are free. They're on my website. You just go have them fill out a worksheet and send it to you. So there's tools out there for you guys to use to be able to help them work on that mental piece of their performance. So seeking out more support is that piece. What else is already out there that is already created that I can do and I can implement with my athletes to help me be more effective by helping them be more successful. And then helping them recognize that suffering's kind of part of the reward. That it's, if it was easy, it wouldn't feel as good to get to the end of that race. So that's part of it. It's part of the package. And I have all kinds of resources on my website for the psychology of sport performance and sport psychology and mental skills training. There's a blog. I've got a Facebook and Twitter. And this book, because I specialize in endurance athletes, this book is meant for, it's marketed for everybody, but it's meant for endurance athletes. It's just like, I had so many athletes they had so much performance anxiety before their competitions that they were like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I think I want to quit my sport. And it's something that they loved. And it was breaking my heart to think that all you needed are a few tools and you're going to come out with a PR. Not only are you going to not quit, you're going to have the best season ever. And so I had to write this book. So this is another tool in your tool belt to give to your athletes. Like, here, work through the book, work through the worksheets, work on your mental game. And then you can just focus on working on that physical piece.